kingdom of Jeroboam is going to be wiped out. It's going to be taken over by another who I hope is going to follow me. Okay, so Jeroboam's failure leads to the destruction of his own family. But now I want to show you the legacy. And I'm going to click through some things here that I think are just going to astonish you. So Jeroboam's son Nadab reigns for just a short period of time, and then he's killed by a guy named Baasha. Baasha becomes the king. And when he dies, we get this epitaph of Baasha's life. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, walking in the ways of Jeroboam and committing his sin, which he had caused Israel to commit. Zimri, the next guy, so he died because of the sins he had committed, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord and walking in the ways of Jeroboam and in the sin he had committed and had caused Israel to commit. Omri, the next one, he walked in all the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and in his sin, which he had caused Israel to commit. Ahab, he not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. Men, single men, don't ever marry a woman named Jezebel. Trouble. That's all I got to say. Next, we have Ahaziah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord because he walked in the ways of his father and mother and in the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. Joram, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He did not turn away from them. Jehu, however, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit, the worship of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. Think it's over? Oh no. Jehoahaz, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord by following the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit, and he did not turn away from them. Jehoash, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. None of these are his descendants, by the way. These are all people who killed to get into power, and yet every single one of them is doing exactly what Jeroboam did. Oh, look, Jeroboam II. What do you think he did? Yeah, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. Zechariah, not the prophet Zechariah, not the priest that we find in the book of Luke, but a king, a guy named Zechariah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord as his fathers had done. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. Menahem, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. During his entire reign, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Are you seeing a pattern? The next one, Pekahiah, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. Now pay close attention here. This next one's going to get a little confusing, okay? Watch very closely. Pekah, he's the next guy. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. And so at the end of all this, God allows the nation of Israel, the northern tribes, to be conquered and carried off to Assyria. And we get this final epitaph on the entire nation. When God tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants, the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. And if that's not enough, if 200 years of ancient Israel history isn't enough for the legacy of this one man's failure to damage an entire group of people, notice this. Almost 1,000 years later, Sir, talking to Jesus, a woman says, I can see that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. For 1,000 years, this man's failure. For 1,000 years, this man's failure led one after one more person to commit the same failure. If you look at Jeroboam's life from the standpoint of what he did and the lasting legacy it had, you would say he was a dramatic success. His policies lasted for 1,000 years. But if you look at him from the standpoint of what God wanted him to be, he was an abject failure. Because his failure lasted for 1,000 years. I want to give you our momentum principle. The first half of our momentum principle today is this: unchecked failure leads to more failure. Now, you're not a king, but you might be a parent or an employer. And if you make a mistake, if you fail in some way and don't correct it, don't check it, you could lead a legacy of failure that impacts people down throughout the centuries. If you're a parent and you don't correct the pieces of you that are failing your kids, you could lead a legacy of damage in their hearts that lasts for a very long time. This one man in a little part of the world leads 1,000 years of failure. Even people who didn't respect his family still followed his policies. Well, I don't want to just leave you there. I want to help you understand how to deal with it, how to solve the problem, how to handle your failure. So flip on to the back side of your note sheet, and we're going to try to give you something you can take home here. And the first thing I want to recognize with you is that every one of us has coping mechanisms when it comes to failure. When I was in 3rd grade, I came up with an entrepreneurial business. We used glue and paper and colored markers, and we made pencil toppers for our classmates. And I figured out a method of how to do this, and I got a couple other people to join me. One girl provided the glue, one guy provided the paper, another guy provided the markers, and I was just sort of like the supervising manager of the thing. And so we made these pencil toppers out of glue and markers, and then we sold them for like $0.25 a piece. It was awesome. It was miraculous because the very next day the glue would dry, and then it would be all clear. And when it was clear, it looked gross. But when it was white, it looked cool. And I can give you the recipe sometime. We can talk about it later. Maybe I'll just sell it to you. But anyway, so I made these things, but when we ran out of glue, the business died, and I felt like a failure because we tried to come up with a new recipe for the glue, and it didn't work. It was just done. It was all over. So I decided I was going to simply jump ship to another project. And so I jumped ship over to paper frogs. And I made paper frogs. This is all in 3rd grade. I made paper frogs, and I sold them to people for $0.25 each. And that was a problem because they were very simple to make. And once everybody else realized that they could make them themselves, the market got saturated, and then it was hard for me to enter into, it was just tough. And so that business was dying. I could tell that business was dying. And so I jumped ship to another business. And I discovered that now that I had like a pocket full of quarters, my friends wanted sometimes to buy sodas from the soda machine. And it took 50 cents. But quite often they would only have $0.25. And so they would come up to me and they'd be like, "Hey, Jeff, can I borrow $0.25?" And I would be like, how can we monetize 3rd grade one more time? And so I gave them $0.25, and I sat down with my buddy, and we talked about how we could, figure this thing out. And he said, "You know what we need to do? We need to charge interest." Yeah, that's a great idea. Loan people money, charge interest. And being 3rd graders, we came up with the most easy math to do. Just double it. And so I would say, "Okay, I'll give you $0.25, but tomorrow you bring back an extra $0.25. So I'll give you $0.25 today. Tomorrow you come back with 50 cents. And it worked for a couple days. The 3 people who took us up on the offer came back with extra $0.25. And it was like awesome. We had doubled our money in a day. That was just phenomenal. But the 3rd day, there was a girl who didn't come back with her 50 cents. What do we do? Well, now she owes us 50 cents, right? And so if we follow the same principle, tomorrow it should be $1. So we just told her that. We're like, "Okay, so tomorrow it'll be $1. And so she comes back the next day and has $1. And it goes fine for a couple days until someone comes back the second day and they don't. And we're realizing this is getting really out of hand. Because now this person owes us $2 for the $0.25 that we loaned them. And my friend Michael comes up to me. He says, "Jeff, I can't be part of the loan anymore." And I said, "Why not?" It's because I talked to my dad. I said, "So?" My dad said it's called loan sharking. He said it's illegal. And I don't want to go to jail. And I was like, come on, Michael, your dad's pulling your leg. I've never heard of loan sharking. And of course, being in third grade, I'd already heard everything that there was to hear. And so I was like, I'd never heard that. So I tried to keep it up one more day. And then I realized, you know what? If this really is something bad, I don't want to go there. So I talked to my teacher, and I told my teacher what we were doing. And she said, you're what? And I was like, okay, then we're done. So I gave the money back to the other kids in the class, and we got on with that. But I learned from that there are a couple coping mechanisms we have with failure. One coping mechanism is to just deny that it's failure and keep going. Another coping mechanism is to jump ship from one failed process or project onto another and say, well, I'm just going to jump to something else. I'm going to leave that other thing to die, and I'm going to jump to this other thing. There's another way that we do it, and I call it selling your soul, where basically it's like I'm going to compromise my moral compass to alleviate my practical failures. And that's where we get into trouble. If you're ever tempted to do that, just remember my loan sharking story, and maybe it'll help you to not do that. But I want to give you 4 basic steps on how to really handle failure. Number 1, understand the real problem. Understand the real problem. Think back with me to Jeroboam. What was the promise God made to him? If you obey me, you'll be king over everything you want, and there will always be one of your descendants on the throne. What was Jeroboam's first thought once he became king? If I let people go to Jerusalem to worship God, they will leave me, they will kill me, and they will go back to Rehoboam as their king. You have to get this. Jeroboam didn't make a minor failure about practical things. It wasn't that God said, oh, by the way, I want people to worship me, and Jeroboam made a minor failure about where to worship him. It wasn't that Jeroboam said, hey, let's have a worship station here in Bethel and a worship station there in Dan. It was that Jeroboam made a deeper mistake earlier, and the deeper mistake earlier was that he simply didn't believe what God said. God said, obey me, and you will always have an heir on this throne. Jeroboam says, if I let the people obey God, they will kill me. He simply didn't believe what God had said. And you know what that teaches me? That teaches me that Jeroboam's failure wasn't a practical one at all. It was a heart failure. And when you fail in some endeavor of your life, or when I fail in some endeavor of my life, we have to recognize that it's because of something deeper inside us that caused the failure. We can't accept the excuse that, oh, market conditions weren't right, or, I just didn't talk about it correctly, or I didn't approach